the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
Itari? Whiskey? Itari me! You could never unlock my secret. Oh no! Suddenly, don't leave me! Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being so patient, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat. Kind of a last-minute ad, but I'm really glad that Teal Deer made himself available to come on and hang out with me on this Fireside Chat. Hi, Teal Deer. How are you doing?
Hello.
Yes,
I'm here.
he is here. So, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I don't think you've ever been on a Fireside Chat on our channel before. No, he hasn't actually, because every time that we've had you on, it's actually been you and Alison, or you and Karen, or both, and I'm kind of there, but like just kind of running the show. So you and I have actually never gotten to just talk to each other without women being a part of the equation in some fashion.
It's true.
Yeah.
Now we can sit around and talk about boobs and how much we hate women.
Yes.
Because there's no women here.
That's exactly right. That's why we're doing that. So, Dr. Animercam just said, "Holy crap, it's Barry White Deer again. Let me get the lube." Yes, we know that Teal Deer's voice is a little deeper. There's nothing we can do about it. It's fine. We'll deal with it. This is the reason why we're having all these issues. I don't think it's limited to opera. It's something else. Something your computer hates you. This used to happen to me too, by the way. So it could be the microphone you're using.
That's fine, because I can record it in Audacity and it's fine.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know.
It just something somewhere just decide. Maybe there's some weird driver conflict somewhere that it's just like, oh no, fuck you. You're gonna do this now.
Yeah. Well, fuck it. We'll get through this either way. So, it's fine. So, it's I've been giving this whole just with everything that's happened, and I mean, like today, for example. I don't know if you know this, but I'm pretty sure you know this. The Notre Dame Cathedral is on fire. This is the absolute state of the world right now. That sums it up. The absolute state of Paris. And with all of this chaos, first of all, did you know? I assume you knew that, but did you know that?
Well, I know most of France has been on fire for the past sort of 6 months now.
Yeah. Like figuratively or literally?
Oh, both.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends who you ask. If you ask the media, it's only figurative. If you ask actual French people, it's real.
Yeah. So, and we got, with all that's going on, like the people getting deported because they want to confront Comedy Central. It's a story of Avi, I can't remember his last name, but there's just so much chaos. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about as someone who talks primarily about men's issues is the connection that all of this sort of radically violent tribalism, which is I think what we're looking at, is a consequence of the issues that we have with the genders. I don't want to say facing men specifically, because I think that impacting one affects the other. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the left's war on language. And I don't know if that's something that you've thought about much or even talked about, because I watch a lot of your videos, but I haven't seen them all. So what do you think about that as an idea?
Or about a war on language?
Yes, the war on language.
Well, this is just the left trying to control how people talk about things. So I'm going to have to go and shoot my cat. She's being annoying for a second.
Okay, no problem. Avi Yemeni, thank you, Deadly Do Right. I keep forgetting his name, but you know the guy. And he's coming back.
No, she's just being stressy. Yeah, anyway, on to the topic. I think I've sort of talked about this a little bit before, how it's just this weird obscurantism that they like to do so that they can basically avoid talking about certain topics, and then whenever you do try to talk about them, they can either attempt to discredit you by saying, well, you're not using the language that we want you to use.
Mhm.
Therefore, you're not allowed to talk on the topic. And if you do use words which are outside of their bizarre, created, obscurantist way of dealing with things, they get to call you a racist or a white supremacist or a sexist or all of
Sure.
this stuff. And
Yeah.
again, then you're not allowed to talk.
Yes.
And
It's
then,
so.
well, we see this when it comes to talking about, especially what with the SGWism in media these days. It's, oh, well, you see, this thing's not for you, so you just have to go away. It doesn't matter what it is, all roads lead to you're not allowed to be here anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the other things that they've done, I think it started, and this is again my theory, it started with them redefining left itself. So they redefined their own position as something that it doesn't represent reality, and then they also they also, I think, used their power over language, their manipulation of language, to give terms or accusations of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. Like they've made those into the kind of powerful tools they are now, and they've also even I think they've redefined what it is to be on the left, because if you'll permit me, and then maybe if you disagree or if you have something to add, that's cool. I'd like to hear, because this is something I've been bouncing around and I've been talking about on my own channel as well as on HBR's on occasion. The idea that the left has ever been the same as being a liberal is a lie. And it's a lie that I think that a lot of people don't like to hear, that they don't want to hear about that, because let's say you ask a normie liberal person and they will think of themselves as a liberal, and they think that because of that, that means that they also have to be on the left. That this was going on when people were taking I mean, this is very old, but I started to think about this more when I saw people taking that political compass test around the time of Gamergate, because they wanted to prove that they weren't right-wing conservatives when, SJWs accused them of it. And I remember even then I thought to myself, why does it matter what someone, like, what's so bad about being a right-wing conservative? Like, I even wondered that. Not that that's not what I am, but I just wondered if it's something that you have to, like, prove that you aren't, like it matters, because they're going to accuse you of whatever they're going to accuse you of, no matter what. And it got me thinking about
According
that.
to them, right wing just means wrong.
Yeah.
And terrible person, and just, if you are right wing, that's it. Everything you could possibly say has been invalidated. You are not allowed to have any points of view. Any data you present is automatically wrong.
Yes. And it gives them permission not just to dismiss you, but to even be violent towards you. And there are people who I have a lot of respect for that I think give that right-wing criticism too much credence. And the more I look into the truth about being on the left and being on the right, and this is not the same as being liberal or conservative. I think those are different, completely different animals that the left has cleverly sort of altered. And a lot of people who are right-wing and conservative have kind of gone along with this narrative. That's why the people on the right that tend to play the same game, like, oh, well, the Democrats were the real racists, or, stuff like that. Like, we're doing feminism right. These kinds of things, they're never going to win because they're playing the same game. And the fact is, none of that is accurate. Like, none of that stuff, that framework is kind of an illusion. And so I don't know if you see what I'm saying, but like the left, the story is that in the 1960s, the communists wanted to talk about communism in the US. And they weren't allowed to talk about communism because we weren't happy with communists at the time. There was a Cold War going on. And, you know, we were like, there was the McCarthyism stuff and all this was going on, right? And so what the left did instead was they became liberals insofar as they were large free speech proponents. And so they went to Berkeley because there were a bunch of these guys in college campuses. They were professors and so on. And so they wanted to sort of like, you know, make the conversation to put them in the position of being the underdogs. So they had to essentially make free speech a primary objective. So they were big free speech proponents in the 1960s. This is why the Berkeley free speech, I think they called them protests or riots, but I'm going to go with protests, I guess. These big Berkeley free speech protests in the 1960s were led by what they called liberals, but they're really lefties because they wanted to talk about communism. And so they, at that time, I think that they managed to co-opt the conversation, not just so that they could talk about communism and socialism and stuff in the 60s, and people, because we wanted to give them free speech, we kind of, you know, allowed them that, but they also co-opted what it meant to be liberal because they used liberalism to get what they wanted. And so I think that from then, it's basically just escalated from there. And I think what we have now is people who call themselves liberals that aren't, because they know that being a liberal in their mind puts them on, it makes them the good guys, right? It puts them on the right side of history. But when you expose them as just being leftists, which is not the same, and you also expose the history of leftism, which is to say, for example, it is said, and even like really smart people say this, if you go all the way on the right, you become a fascist or a Nazi. That's not true. The Nazis weren't on the right, and neither were the fascists. History shows that they were all leftists. The communists, the Nazis, the Mussolini's people, they hated each other, sure, but communists fight communists all the time because only so many people could be on top. So, like, the whole thing has been distorted.
If I ask you, if I say, okay, I'm thinking of a government regime, it glorifies the working classes, it wants to remove power from the upper classes, it despises capitalism, it wants to largely remove religion outside of absolute necessity from things, and it wants to deal with racial equality. Which authoritarian regime have I just described?
Nazi Germany, Communist Russia, Maoist China, North Korea.
I've described fascism. I've described certain branches of fascism. I've described National Socialism. I've described communism, Leninism, Stalinism, and Maoism.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of those fits that bill.
Yes, and that's the thing that it's not talked about enough. It's important, and it's not talked about enough, and it's relevant because feminism is it's the most powerful. So there are clearly activists on the left that use a lot of different, the intersectionality, right, to accomplish their goals. But the most potent of all those is feminism, and it always has been, even before we called it feminism. So, like, a lot of people say the suffragettes were the first wave feminists, but the suffragettes didn't call themselves feminists at the time because the term wasn't it existed, but it wasn't in the mainstream lexicon. So it's almost like it's just another way in which feminism often takes credit for shit that it didn't do. But it's sort of like this revisionist history stuff. But it works out because, as I was saying, if we look at all these sort of social movements on the left that exist now, such as Black Lives Matter, such as Antifa, they're all feminist organizations. And the feminism part of it is actually the most important part. And the reason, in my opinion, is because it's the most effective. And the reason why it's the most effective is because we love women. Right?
Yeah, feminism is a formalized, politicized form of gynocentrism.
Exactly. So the other thing that so yeah, the left's war on language, and that's gotten us to where we are now. It's actually very difficult to talk about the truth about political ideologies, gender, race. I mean, like, it's all so convoluted, and the truth is actually quite difficult to find because they've constructed reality through language around it. And this is why I've been thinking so much about this. Like, for example, and you let me know again what you think about this. I've been thinking about this a long time and I hate to start a sentence by saying as a blank, but I'm Puerto Rican, right? And so when I was a kid, I was always told that being Puerto Rican is being a race. And that means that things that impact you could very well be impacting you because of your race. So I was sort of taught this victim mentality when I was younger, when I was a young teenager. Like, if the police pulled me over, I had to assume that it must be because I was brown. And as time wore on and I started thinking about this feminist stuff and getting into conversations with lots of really smart people on Fireside Chats and stuff like that, I got to thinking, I heard a line that Jesse Lee Peterson, do you know who Jesse Lee Peterson is?
Yes, he's the preacher.
Yeah, he's the reverend show that does the radio show. Yeah. He said, he used to say, or he still says this, he says that there's no such thing as racism, sexism, Islamophobism, homophobism, you know, these kinds of things, right? It's one of his catchphrases. And I used to think, I think he's just trying to get around that conversation so that people can't like use these slurs against him in order to shut down conversation, which is usually how these things come across. So I didn't really buy it. And I've been giving it a lot of thought lately, and I'm not sure that I'm 100% on board with that sentiment, but here's something that I do think when this discussion around racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, you know, all these things, I think that those are ways to conceal misandry. And what I mean is not to paint men as the primary victims here, but to say, let's say that, okay, so human beings are tribal. And so we're just, that's the way we are, right? So we tend to want to be with people that are like us, and we tend to see people that are not like us as members of an outgroup. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're our enemy, but we just tend to be more comfortable around people that are like us. And this could be for any number of reasons. And I think that the tribal aspect, the way that we view the idea of a tribe changes depending on the cultural stuff that sort of reinforces it. I think that it changes depending on what women sort of declare as the tribe, because women have the majority of the social power, and I think that they get to kind of, you know, influence what the definition or how we like describe a tribe. And so you get tribes that exist along several lines. For example, they can exist along lines of race. They can exist along lines of culture and nationality, ethnicity, language, and these kinds of things, right? And I think that what happens is when you destroy the family, which I think is the smallest tribe, and I'm not necessarily on board with this idea that if we were just all like super duper individualists, we would be good. I don't think that that's realistic. I think that because humans tend to be tribal for one, and women in particular are less individualistic than men, I don't think it's likely to work out that way. So the best you can hope for is the smallest possible tribe, which is the family, right? That's like the immediate family. And so you visualize yourself as part of that small tribe. But when you don't have that and that's destroyed, then people try to find different ways to form tribes. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay.
What you've actually described there in sort of a roundabout way is identity saliency. And identity saliency is something which is quite interesting. It's basically how salient is an identity to you. It's how much meaning does it have to you? How much weight does it carry? How much does it influence you? And it was sort of an interesting side effect of the what was it? The implicit association tests. Those implicit bias tests, which are basically complete and utter pseudoscience. They're the things that feminists like to point at and say,
Oh yeah.
"Oh, you see, you reacted 0.1 hundredth of a second slower recognizing a black face than a white face. That proves you hate black people," or something absolutely ridiculous like
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, one of the sort of interesting things to come out of that, though, was the fact that you can tell people quite simply, okay, this is your group from now on. You can just basically name whatever it is. And in some cases, people's results will change according to literally what you've just told them. Like right now, you can create something on the spot, as it
Mm-hmm.
were, and people will just be like, okay, I belong to this thing now.
So if you say, to people, you are now part of the group immigrants, for
Yeah. Yeah,
example.
it could be anything. It's like, okay, you're
Yeah.
part of Team Blue, you're part of Team Red.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately they start having different opinions about those colors for no other reason than because you said, okay, you're this and you're this.
Yeah.
It can immediately start impacting people like that. That's actually part of the reason why those implicit association tests are basically complete and utter pseudoscience. It's because we're able to create these bonds quite quickly and discard them quite quickly as well, because it basically is a temporary heuristic. A heuristic is basically just the way that human beings create mental shortcuts towards certain bits of information. They can be quite flexible like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're not totally plastic to the environment. There's reasonable evidence to suggest that some of them are a bit more hardwired than others. But yeah, they can come and go quite quickly like that.
Yeah.
And some of them have more weight than others. Some of them you can literally create out of whole cloth if you want to. It's pretty fun like that.
Yeah. That's how you get console wars, or people who like pineapple on pizza and
Pineapple
people
on
who
pizza
don't.
is fine. I'm
Yeah.
going out there with that.
There you go, going out with that. But yeah, that's I agree. That's what I was thinking about. I didn't know that there was. I figured there was some studies on this, but you see,
Yeah, it's
when you
basically just how much those identities mean to you.
yes,
And the thing is, they can change contextually as well. So in one circumstance, one identity might be really important to you, but then you change your social setting, and suddenly, it's not anymore.
mm-hmm. And if you take away, because I bet that some of the more hardwired sort of allegiances would be things like having a strong tie to your biological family, or maybe your immediate community, like your neighbors and like the people that are closest to you. And
Well, those are the ones which seem to be most important, especially when
mhm,
it comes to the raising of children. We know this just from repeated experimentation, that children which are raised in two-parent households with both of their biological parents turn out the best, as
yes,
opposed to other living arrangements. You can make it technically even better by having access to extended families. That includes grandparents and cousins, but it's
hmm
kind of like a diminishing return improvement. If having both your biological parents gives you score of 50, then the grandparents might be 20 plus 20, and cousins might be like plus 10 or something.
yeah,
Like, it
exactly.
is a benefit, but it's not as much as the immediate parental biological unit of two.
Yes, right. So like this like I said, that family tribe is like it's like the it's the best tribe for that kind of like to prevent I guess it creates less hostility when you have a connection to that tribe, because you don't have people that are outside trying to create hostility towards other sort of family units or other tribes. But when you break the family and you connect people instead, you divide them along lines of gender and sexuality and nationality and ethnicity, and then you sort of confuse what the word race means by saying, Mexicans are a race, and Muslims are a race, and black people are a race, and Asians or Orientals is what I would say is a race. Then it makes it you create a lot of tension and hostility, and it's very divisive, and it's very effective because people are no longer seeing themselves as let's say a last name like the Smith family. You don't say like I'm a Smith. No, instead you're white now or you're black now. And so you have to, I think that and the only way that you can create that hostility, and I won't try to talk too long because people are complaining about me talking too much, but I think is to essentially, the best way to create an outgroup is to say that the people in the outgroup, the people in the other tribes that are most dangerous to your tribe are the men over there. And so you create a threat narrative, as Alison would call it, through the men. And then when people are critical of those men, then the left comes in and they don't say that what you're doing is you're fearing the men of those tribes. They change the words. They say, no, you fear the religion. You fear Islam, right? Or they say you fear black people, not men, not black men, because they're men. And I think that's why, personally, I think that it kind of, the use of those other isms and phobias rather, is a way to conceal the fact that what's being targeted for fear and disgust are the men from those groups. What do you think?
I'm trying to sort of think where to start with this. There's also a few points that I want to make sort of towards the race as group things as well.
Sure.
Because that one's quite interesting, especially since, you get those people, it's like, oh, race doesn't exist, there's only one race, the human race, and various other nonsense like
I
that.
wouldn't go with that, but...
Yeah, it's one of those things, it's like, yeah, no, there's very distinct different genetic populations around there. Yeah, there's a little bit of blurring in between them, but that's like saying, well, the color spectrum goes from red to orange to yellow to all of these other things. And no one's really sure exactly at what line it crosses from one color to the other, therefore no colors exist. No, they do. Just because there's a little bit of blurring in it, if you ask people where does this thing begin and this thing end, you can basically just take the points where lots of people say and you'll notice a pattern eventually. Yeah. People will start putting their arbitrary lines in similar places, and that's where you can say, okay, well, there's a difference there.
Sure.
Like, it's roughly around there.
I agree. One thing I want to add, though, really quick is that, in my opinion, this is another reason why the word racism is not helpful, and I think it makes it more confusing, is that it has very little to do with the actual race of people. It has a lot more to do with the culture of those people. I don't think people dislike other people because they simply like have a different skin color. I think it's because they see cultural differences. When someone reacts to a black man that looks thuggish, it's not because he's black. It's because he looks thuggish. So, yeah,
culture is definitely a part of it. Mm-hmm. There's some evidence to suggest that culture like that is downstream of biology as well.
Yeah.
So there may be sort of a racialized element to it like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, for instance, there's been an allele located in humans which is to do with social sensitivity. And East Asians have more of it than other populations, which might explain why things like communism and honor cultures sort of really took off over there, because, the sort of responsibility and duty is like a really big thing. Bring honor to your family, otherwise it's all shame and all of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of some reason that we can look at sort of all of these different ethnicities and sort of see like, okay, well, maybe that in itself is part of the reason for differences in temperament. If you also look at other things like Big Five personality traits, those vary by country. And Big Five personality has been subject to a lot of both environmental and biological testing, rather unsurprisingly. And it's been worked out that they're roughly 50-50, like roughly 50% inherited and roughly 50% plastic to the environment. Mm-hmm. So again, it's one of those things. If you've got sort of different gene pools in different places, that is something that's going to be influencing it. So at that point, it becomes, well, does that make you a racist or not? If you look at different areas and say, well, I mean, they are different races, for instance, there are these aggregate differences. Does observing that make you in some way bigoted or prejudiced. It's, well, in some way, yes, but is it a bad thing? Because all you're doing is noting objectively measurable reality. Sure, you can't use the average to generalize the individual, but the average is a product of the individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why, again, like I don't like the word racist, because I think that it's difficult. So to have a prejudice doesn't, in my opinion, necessarily mean anything bad. I don't think that that's negative.
Well, it doesn't.
On
All
its
prejudice is another word which has been politicized for heuristic.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically just a politicized word that says, I think the heuristic that you're using is wrong.
Right.
Except that that doesn't mean or prove anything. Like, if you're a white person walking around South Africa and you say, well, I'm going to be in a lot of danger because I'm white and in South Africa.
Yeah.
Well, that's a prejudice. You don't know that you're going to be knifed or
Right.
shot or held up or decapitated or anything like that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a pretty damn good chance that you will be if you're outside one of the white-only compounds.
Yeah. And assuming...
Yes. Is it wrong? Probably not.
Yeah.
Does that make you a racist? Not really. It just means you're learning from experience and the experiences of others. That's not a bad thing.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. It's like prejudging people. It's like, take the same, black man, and if we haven't met him, but we just assume he's going to be taller or have more muscle mass or have a bigger dick, then that's also prejudice. But people wouldn't necessarily say that having a bigger dick is racist. So, because it's like a good thing, right? Some people probably would complain, but that's the point is that there are differences between genetic populations. And I guess to go back to the thing I was trying to say, where I think we're concealing misandry, I can give you an example. The majority of people, of black people who have been killed by police that Black Lives Matter has used as a means to, start their movement, were men. It's like almost all men. I think there were maybe one or two female deaths, right? Now, this is going without even going into what caused those deaths. That's not including that aspect. But you make accusations of racism against people who are being killed more so likely because they're men than the fact that they are of a certain race. And we go to, I could use transphobia as another example. The majority of people who are experience, violence because they're trans are men who transition into women. The majority of men who have been...
I can actually prove to you that the black shooting thing is because man and not black.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really easy to prove. Police, when put under the implicit association tests, and they're told that it is a test for shooting reaction time, and they know that that's what's being tested, will take longer to shoot black suspects than white suspects.
Mm-hmm.
Under the same test conditions, they are more likely to shoot unarmed white suspects than black suspects. When put on, and then, this might seem a bit counterintuitive, when police wear body cams, they are then more likely to deal with, to shoot blacks or arrest blacks. Which actually means, if they were trying to hide the fact that they were all secretly racist, then you'd think they wouldn't do that.
Yeah. And I think that
like all of this evidence taken together basically demonstrates that, no, it's not a thing. It's not a race thing.
No.
Like, there will be, obviously, the odd policeman who is racist, because there are genuinely racist people out there, but they're a very small number. It's certainly not the majority, and it's certainly not something systemic or institutional.
No, certainly not. So that basically goes with what I was saying, because I know about what you were saying with they're more likely to shoot white. They're less likely to shoot blacks than whites suspects. And of course, odds are that there will be more chances that suspects would be males. So I'm not going to try to pretend like these men are being innocently hunted down. I think that it's just a byproduct of being male. That you're just more likely to get involved. You take more risks. So, great, going back to...
You also have to take into account there is actually an interesting difference there, and it is that blacks compared to whites, when it comes to police, blacks are more likely to resist arrest anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that also may explain part of the difference. Now, why they're more likely to resist, I don't know. Maybe they've been constantly told that, well, there's going to be police brutality, and so you need to try and get out of there, or something like that. And
Yeah.
so they feel the need to fight back rather than comply. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe it's just an unfortunate trend that they happen to have got more people who are black and who are more violent. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so going back to the thing I was talking about, you said that you needed to work it out more. This idea that when people use terms, and I wouldn't say in every case, I just think that in more cases than people would like to admit, when people talk about SJWs make accusations of homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, racism. I think that if you were to look at the groups of people who they're framing in that way, is more often than not, they probably have more in common by being men than by being a part of those protected groups. If that makes any sense. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm a little lost on that one.
Okay.
You mean that when they accuse you, the person they're accusing of the ists, are more likely to be male?
No, I mean, that probably happens, but what I mean is that if you have, so for example, Islamophobia accusations are hurled at people who are expressing concerns over Islam, okay?
Right.
And rightfully so. But when they are making these assertions, it usually comes after a terrorist attack, let's say, of some kind, mass shooting, whatever.
Yep.
The people involved in the mass shooting were men, most likely, though they are being backed, worshipped, and often radicalized by women. But those people, the women involved, they kind of vanish to the background. So the guys that are actually committing the act are the men. And so when someone says we got to do something about Islam, or we got to do something about, these, what do they call them? Young, able-bodied, war-ready men, migrants that are coming into our country in droves. And then those people get accused of Islamophobia. I think that the term Islamophobia doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's not an irrational fear of Islam. So the problem is Islam, but I think that what's happening is that people are fearing the men from those tribes, from that other tribe, more than that's actually the more relevant statement. It's sort of like homophobia is a statement that applies to the entire LGBTQIA++, plus, 2 group. But the people who are most affected by actual acts of homophobia are men. They're either gay men or they're trans men, because trans women, they tend to, do I got that right? When you transition from male to female, is that a trans man? Well, I mean, people who transition from male to female.
I don't keep up.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just
trans women, I think is what they call them. But like, trans women are more often the victims of crimes for being trans. Trans men are, not only are they much less likely to be victims of that, but they're also much less common than trans women are. And then gay men are far more likely, like, Islam, they kill gay men. Lesbians, they're basically given I think they're like beaten, and then they're basically told stop being a lesbian, and they put them back in society. And we hardly ever attack them. So the pattern I'm noticing is that when you look at all the groups that people say you're being racist to this group, you're being homophobic to this group, or transphobic or whatever, the majority of people who are actually the ones that suffer, what they would call hate crimes, are men from those groups. And so it seems to me that that's the more common thread that runs through. Does that make sense?
Yes, well, that's because men are the acceptable victims. They're the disposable ones. You're not allowed to victimize a woman regardless of the tribe that she's in. But men of any out group, they're fine. They're fair game. Go for it.
Yeah, and I think that the men from those out groups are the ones that are used, let's say, for accusations. So, like, if we didn't have black men to use, then you wouldn't be able to call anyone racist against black people. Like that, like it's almost like that. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating for effect, but I'm trying to like, this is what I've been working out. Does that make sense? Like, it seems like it's misandry. It makes more sense, but because they don't like the idea that misandry can be a thing, they just can't see men as victims as part of those groups. They just think it must have to do with them being in the group as opposed to them being men in the group.
Yeah, I do think the male part of the identity there is more salient than anything
Yes.
else. I mean, like, if you look at people where it's like, oh, you don't like Islam, it's, okay, well, here's an Islamic woman, do you not like them? It's like, well, they might not like the religion, but they probably don't really so much dislike the person. But if you
Right.
show them an Islamic man, they might be more likely to be like, oh, yeah, don't want any of that.
Yeah, well, what do
Like,
SJ...
who's going to complain,
Mhm.
when a couple of dozen Islamic women move into a place versus a couple of dozen Islamic men? The men are going to be a bigger problem.
Right. I mean,
I
like,
mean, first of all,
whenever...
they will probably be more likely to actually cause problems if they were going to, because
Absolutely.
men and women are just generally different like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Although the Islamic
but I
women
think it
could
also
start...
comes partly from the fact that women have an in-group preference, and their in-group preference seems to be much more salient than other identities. So it's kind of like woman is first and foremost the thing. So
Mhm.
this is why you sort of get women from loads of these different groups bandying together, because it's the sisterhood and all of that stuff, whereas men sort of lack that. And if anything, then men have more out-group preference towards women than men anyway. So I think that definitely plays into it as well. It's just
Yeah.
simply that people just generally prefer women, which is why men
Yep.
then become the acceptable targets.
Exactly. This is why when SJWs want to sort of humanize Islam or make it look good, they just bring out a woman in a hijab and they have her talk about the religion, and they don't generally use men. They use the women to do it. I mean, even when they want a virtue signal, I think Al Jazeera Plus did a video a long time ago talking about why Islamic countries are more progressive and more feminist than Western countries, and they basically talked about how they have more women in positions of political power, and things like that. And that is because we do have a tendency to see the women of those groups as, not just a less of a threat, but also a way to paint those groups in a good light, and even like a way in which they get to create simultaneously create the illusion of them being like better people than Western people, for example. So I think, like, yeah, I mean, for example, again, why is it if gay men, for example, are far more likely to be the victims of homophobic hate crimes, far more likely, whenever you need someone to talk for gay people, it's most of the time it's a lesbian woman. And the weird thing is that nobody cares about lesbians. Like they literally don't matter. Like nobody really commits hate crimes against lesbians. They're like the difference is night and day between the two.
Yeah, I just think this just comes down to just the empathy gap between men and
Yes.
women. That's what all of this is. It all
Yep.
ultimately comes down to just garden variety gynocentrism.
Yeah, pretty much. I got a super chat I want to read out real quick, and then I want to tell you about something else. So, Christopherson, and I just want to mispronounce that, gives us $2 and says Team Green all the way. Some about the red and blue thing. Okay. So the other thing is I wanted to tell you about is did you hear about this new birth control pill?
I did not know.
There's a new male birth control pill. I want to tell you a little bit about it. We talked about it on our news show a couple weeks ago, and it's past, it could be on the market in as little as 10 years, according to a new study. Very recent. This is an update that came out yesterday. And I was expressing some concerns for the pill. And I know it's like I really want a male birth control pill because I think men should definitely be in control of their fertility. However, what this pill is supposed to do, it's got me a little bit concerned. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. All right. So In a recent study, the new pill for men was taken by healthy test subjects for a month. Researchers didn't observe any adverse reactions while the pill produced hormone levels consistent with the ones needed to keep a baby from being made. The new contraceptive, which goes by the super sexy name 11 beta methyl 9 nortestosterone dodexylcarbonate, or 11 beta MNTDC, works by combining two hormones, androgen and progesterone. Our results suggest that the pill, which combines two hormonal activities in one, will decrease sperm production while preserving libido, Christina Wang, the study's co-senior investigator, said. So they did a study, and it involves 40 men. 10 got a placebo. The other 30 got 2 doses of the pill. A few of the people who took the drug did notice side effects, including fatigue, acne, and headaches, but they were mild. No one stopped taking the drug because of the side effects. Just like the female birth control pills, 28 days isn't enough to guarantee the contraceptive effects, so more long-term studies need to be done, but Wang is hopeful. Safe, reversible hormonal male contraception should be available in the next 10 years. So this is why I'm a little bit concerned. I guess I just have a problem with pills fucking with men's hormones, because we already live in a time where the T levels of the average man and woman are a lot lower than they were 50 years ago. And I just, you just get really suspicious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I had sort of a similar reservation with the birth control jab. That was I think about a year or two ago now. That was another one which altered hormone levels. Yeah, I'm just not a fan of things that alter hormones.
Yeah.
I just never have been. It's just physical barriers are generally better for this sort of stuff. Just because it's not. I know that when it comes to an adult, it's going to be oh, well, it's not going to have a permanent effect or anything, because it's not like you're still growing, but there's still the potential for when you change a hormone for there to be a secondary effect further down the line, where there may be a permanent change or a permanent adaptation. So you start pumping yourself full of an artificial androgen of some description, let's say, your body may grow more receptors to deal with the thing. It may start shutting them down because it doesn't need as many. There's loads of other potential adaptations which can happen from doing things like that, which then means when you come off of it, you can then be in a different baseline position as to where you started.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know, I don't like the idea of just taking a pill to mess with your hormones, so that it's tough, because I want men to have some control over their fertility, but I don't know if you want to become a soy boy, as it were. And I know that that's just a meme that gets thrown around, but that's what I want to prevent anyway. So I have my concerns with that. But it's only, and the thing is too, that they've been talking about it, but it's only been getting tested for a month. So it's a little bit too early to get excited for that.
Yeah, these things, they'll be years. Assuming they ever come out at all. You got to keep in mind that when it comes to contraceptives for men, especially hormonal or just chemical ones in general, doesn't necessarily have to be hormonal. There's not a whole lot of pressure for it. So it's kind of because there's a lack of pressure, pharmaceutical companies may see that as a lack of market as well.
Yeah.
Which won't encourage them to research it or put any particular effort or rush into doing it. It'll just kind of chug along as it is, as people are interested in it, basically. It's not like the female birth control pill, which had such a massive lobbying for it that pharmaceutical companies ended up crapping out products which were harmful to women because of political pressure. It was oh, if you don't give it to us now, it's because you hate women. So they got a bunch of substandard things with a bunch of adverse effects. But it was there just because they wanted it, and the market pressure was great enough.
Yeah, even the female birth control pill has a lot of issues too. And I think it's actually contributed to a lot of the problems we have today too, because you have women that I think were reproducing with men that they otherwise wouldn't have, but the pill has affected their hormones in such a way that it actually affected their selections, their choices in men, and we're seeing the product of that. So at least in many cases, but I couldn't tell you for sure how many. I don't have the citations for that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's going to be difficult to measure,
Mm-hmm.
because there is actually a slim window of optimal genetic fitness. It was funny actually. I was reading I can't remember what it was. It was something that I was reading a couple of weeks ago to do with actually Icelandic reproduction and the optimum uh, genetic variation that's needed
Mm-hmm.
to sort of provide optimum outcome for humans. Turns out in Iceland, it's third cousins.
Third cousins.
Third cousin, or someone who is as genetically dissimilar to you as a third cousin.
Whoa.
That's the optimum distance to be away to ensure optimum genetic fitness. Any closer, and you start seeing effects of inbreeding, which causes problems, and any further away, you start getting outbreeding problems, which is something which I
Outbreeding.
think, yeah, it's something I think people need to be more aware of. There is actually a problem with outbreeding. Like there seems to be this sort of weird misunderstanding people have about like, oh, hybrid vigor, and you need to be as far away from each other as possible genetically. No, it's not the case actually. There, if you breed too far away from your own genetic pool, basically, you start end up having lots of really weird problems or other problems coming in which wouldn't have otherwise happened. So for things like say sickle cell anemia, which is like almost exclusively a black thing, if you get Asians, Middle Easterners, whites breeding into that, then they start being able to exhibit that trait, whereas they wouldn't before. So that's one example of something where outbreeding could
Mm-hmm.
start causing problems.
Hmm.
Um, there's no actual reason to think that third cousin, or it, like when I say third cousin, it doesn't actually necessarily mean find your third cousin and fuck them. It just means that someone who is as genetically far away
Yeah.
as that is. So that could be someone who is not your third cousin, who hasn't even been related to your family for hundreds or thousands of years, but they're from the same sort of genetic stock. They're just about that far away because you
Yeah.
share X number of alleles anyway.
Yeah. 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 Well, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So,
So yeah, it's a thing. It's also, this is another thing that people don't seem to understand about breeding populations, and they seem to think that small populations inherently mean inbreeding, and inbreeding inherently means wrong or bad, and that's not
mm-hmm.
actually the case. Lab mice, for instance, the little white ones that you get for, well, labs, unsurprisingly,
Yeah, Pinky and the Brain.
they are all horribly inbred. Every single one of them is ridiculously inbred. That's why you're able to get such stable populations actually for testing, because the lineages have been so controlled for such a long time
Mm-hmm.
that basically the recessive alleles, which can cause problems if they were inbred with each other, don't exist. So it's purely, say, dominant alleles which don't cause problems. Except you can have populations where obviously they've kept those recessive alleles which can cause problems, which then you can breed in for the sake of certain experiments and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. For example, even in the UK, we've got an example of there's one species of cattle, they're called Chillingham cattle. There's only a few thousand of them in the UK. They are a very inbred population. They don't have any problems because, again, it's one of those things where there's basically no real negative effect recessive alleles left. So
Mm-hmm.
they can inbreed, but still not have any problems as a result of it. So inbreeding is only a problem when you have these recessive alleles, which then come together and start pairing up in order to manifest those problems.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I imagine those cattles are also delicious.
Oh,
I
very
mean,
possibly.
uh, All right. Well, yeah. So I didn't know about the outbreeding thing. That's pretty interesting. So that's that seems to go
Yeah,
against.
it's just problems from outbreeding are less. They just generally seem to be less likely to occur than inbreeding problems
Sure.
because you're sort of less likely to get these weird recessive problems that crop up as a result of it, because the odds of the two people having, or the two animals, whatever it is, having those alleles that would work together in that way is less. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, outbreeding is a thing, and there absolutely are problems which can come by.
All right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, that's sort of like, again, it kind of goes against the whole, like, treat people like dogs and just make mutts. And we'll be better off for
don't
it.
do that. It's not optimal for genetic fitness of a population.
Yeah. And I think that actually kind of expresses itself in people's choices anyways, their sexual choices, because they tend to, I think that people more than likely tend to like people that are similar to them, and they tend to select for that anyway.
I've sort of already mentioned this, I think, somewhere on Honey Badger Radio. I mean, it comes back, I suppose, to not population, personality being about 50% genetic, 50% environmental, roughly. That is, even people who end up as being friends, like they don't even have to be sexual partners, just friends, tend to be genetically closer related than a random sampling would allow.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if you looked at all of your friends, who obviously they have to sort of be within your race or genetic population anyway, like if you're like an Asian guy and you've got a black friend, no hope in hell of this happening, obviously. But if you're an Asian and you've got other Asian friends and you gene test your closest friends, the odds are you're going to have more genes in common with them than just some randomer on the street.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. Well, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So, thanks again for hanging out. Oh, I got a super chat from Black Knight Fool. Gives us $5 Canadian. He says citations needed in regards to mixed racing problems. I think you mean race mixing problems. I don't think he's saying that there's a problem with race mixing. He's saying that there could be problems with like mixing too far outside.
I'm just pointing out that outbreeding is a phenomenon that has been observed.
Yeah, and just look up outbreeding.
It doesn't mean that it's inherently a problem or bad. It's just
there's nothing moral about it. It's not a moral argument. Yeah. It's just like...
Yeah, it's like if you're a white person and you do hook up with a black person who has sickle cell and that gets passed on. I'm not saying it's inherently good or bad. It just is.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with asking, like, for example, when we have opinions that we've sort of culturally agreed on, that we consider to be moral opinions on things, I guess it's helpful to question where the roots of those come from. So, for example, it doesn't mean that you'd be against it or whatever, but when people say bestiality is wrong, we don't just take it at face value and say, yes, it's wrong because they say so. I think it's helpful to go, okay, so where does that come from? Well, it makes sense because you can't make babies with a horse, and it's there's like reasons for it, like that are more pragmatic at their core, outside of it's gross, but like that it's gross isn't really the best argument. So I like to go deeper and try to find out where it comes from. So when people say, well, incest is wrong, I would ask, well, why is incest wrong? Well, just thinking about that, okay, well, I understand that it's probably been decided that it was wrong because when people had children, and it wasn't always, because you had, like, back in the day, people that, could only marry people of royal blood or whatever, right? There was a lot of issues with some degree of inbreeding because royalty was kind of a small number of people. But when we decided that, I think that incest was an immoral thing, it probably had something to do with the fact that having children in incestuous relationships resulted in really messed up kids. And so people were like, this is probably not a good idea because this isn't working out.
Consanguinity, it's actually a real big problem.
Yeah.
It's a real big problem, actually, amongst Islamic communities,
it is.
Especially in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing which I love bringing up with the left, because they don't want to address that one. Because, they like to do the, lone wolf, mental illness, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, why is this population more prone to mental illness than the white population around them? Oh, turns out they're all fucking their first cousins.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I
Yeah.
wonder if that's got anything to do with this higher rate of mental illness that seems to be happening. But, then they call you a racist because you're like, oh no, this is not, they don't have more mental illness problems than anything else.
It's actually a problem in the Black community too. Not everywhere, but in areas where there's like a lot of very low income Blacks that live in the same sort of neighborhood or community. There's issues with, I wouldn't call it, it's not straight up incest. Like they don't know that they're doing this, but think of it like this: you have a neighborhood, a community, and everyone, it's mostly Black, and they're very poor, and the Black women that are there, they're on welfare, and they have their pick of the litter in terms of like the men, and so they're not marrying anybody, they're not settling down, they're not getting into monogamous relationships. And so what they do instead is they select the most the top, say, 10% of men to sleep with, because they only want the best men, right, that are in the immediate vicinity. And those men, they tend to select for men that can essentially protect them. So they're not necessarily looking for rich men. It'd be nice that they could, but they're not really there, right? So there aren't as many because it's a low income area. So instead, they select for violent men that can protect them. And a lot of the women are selecting the same men. So this very small number of men are having sex with the majority of the women in this area. And then those women get pregnant and they have multiple children from multiple different fathers. And this is absolutely something that happens. Okay. So when those children, who are daughters and sons, they grow up and become teenagers and they become sexually active, they're in the same community, they find each other, and they have sex with each other without knowing that they may share a father. It's because they don't know who the fathers of their children are, because those persons are not involved.
This is why every society around the world has marriage or an institution very similar to it.
Yes.
To prevent that stuff from happening. It's not about oppressing women, it's about making sure you don't end up with flipper babies.
Mm-hmm. That's why, I haven't seen instances that extreme, but there are issues with mental health in the Black community as well. There are issues with, girls hitting puberty a lot earlier, and just all kinds of other stuff. And I think that it's not as bad as the Islamic world, but I think that this kind of mistaken inbreeding is contributing to that problem. And it's because there's no fathers. So, that's why I bring it back to that. We need dads back in the homes, and that's what I think is the main issue here.
Family units are the most important part of society.
Yes.
You cannot have a functioning society of completely atomized individuals. It does not work. You need to have some sense of linearity from generation to generation, otherwise you will end up with problems like that.
Absolutely.
And still, once again, even if you don't like that, objectively best environments for the children: two genetically related parents with access to extended family.
Absolutely.
You're failing that, you just play that card. You just play the think of the kids card.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, on women. People then like to say, oh, but what about the bad parents and the things like that? It's like, well, maybe you should encourage people to pick better partners.
Yeah.
Encourage women to pick better men.
That's right. You got to encourage women to pick better men. And that goes back to when I was saying that Black women in these low-income communities, they don't pick the men that have the most potential for earning, because that requires those women to kind of wait until he gets to that point where he's able to become a provider, like to acknowledge that potential. They pick the men that have the immediate, gratification that essentially satisfies their immediate need for protection in a world that they've essentially been told is dangerous for them. So this is how you get these hyper-aggressive children. That's the interesting
difference between short-term and long-term mating strategies in humans, because again, I suppose this is another thing that a lot of people just maybe aren't aware of. But people's choices for mate preference change over time. For women, it's when they're basically offered the chance of short-term relationships or long-term relationships have very different goals in mind for what they find attractive. So when it comes to the one-nighters, they are looking at physical attractiveness. Make sure you're tall, not overweight, good looking. That's about it. When it comes to wanting long-term things, that's when they start looking for the protector provider, the guy with the fat wallet, basically, and physical appearance and stature become less important. Um, at risk of bringing up the old cliche statement that it's the alpha fucks beta bucks model.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what happens. This is something which has been extensively researched. Again, it's just people want different things at different times in their lives. I mean, even if you look at women's housing situations during recessions. During recessions, women are more likely to stay in relationships than when they're not in recessions. Why? Because that means that they're basically having someone else to help pay for them to live.
Yep.
I mean, what a surprise. The environment causes people to change their behavior as well. My God, it's crazy. Wow. Whoever would have thought that this would be a thing that could happen.
Yeah, that's a radical notion. Ciara Flora gives us $2 and says, Teal dear, I hope you are doing well these days. So thank you, Ciara Flora. Are you doing
My
well
smile
these days?
and optimism are gone. I want to leave the clown world.
Honk honk. Right. Okay, so last thing, because we're like about an hour and 15 minutes in, but something else I wanted to ask you about. So ICMI 2019 is coming up. We're going to be hosting it here in the shithole known as Chicago, also known as MAGA country. And one of the panels I want to have is I want to do a panel. I've always wanted to see what would happen. I think that people would watch, where I have one MRA, one MGTOW, and one pickup artist. And like a relatively, not just a random one, but relatively I guess vocal, like they've done a lot of work on YouTube or wherever, and have them talk about their own sort of experiences with men's issues and how these three kind of groups can, where we are similar, can we help each other, does one group have anything to learn from the other two? And I know that's kind of, it seems like a stupid thing to ask for, but it's something that I want. So what do you think the PUAs can offer to men that MGTOW and MRAs can't?
Oh, well, basically they offer the confidence boost, and what they term the game. Like they give you a bit more of an understanding of female psychology and male psychology, in the use of short-term mate selection.
Yeah, I think
that I think would be the biggest thing that they give you, because unlike the feminists who like to tell you that it's all just a bunch of misogyny, I've actually watched several of their online talks and things like that, and so much of it is just confidence boosting. It's just saying look, you're a guy, just go up, have a plan about something to talk about. If they don't respond, you just sort of go, oh, all right, nice chatting with you, and just walk off. It's just about building guys up to have the confidence to approach, have some sort of plan of something to say, and if it goes wrong, have an exit strategy, and if it goes right, make sure you've got somewhere else to go. Make sure there's a step 2. So it's like, oh, well, I can talk about this, and then I can talk about this, and then I can say, oh, you want to go somewhere, and know where to go. That's all it is. It's just give people confidence and give them a little bit of planning.
Yeah, the thing is that of the three groups, of the three communities, you could say, the PUA seem to be the most popular with men, with normie men.
Yeah, that's because most men want to get laid.
Yeah, exactly. So because of that, that's the biggest group, but they do have that to offer, because I've seen some of their talks as well. But I think that what can PUAs learn from MRAs and MGTOW as well is another good, because that's where the majority of men are going, right? Because again, the thirst is real. They want to get laid. They're looking to, I think most men, they don't want people to necessarily advocate for their issues. They want to look for solutions and a path to solve their own problems. So I think that's one of the reasons why they gravitate towards PUAs. And it's also one of the reasons why PUAs accuse MRAs of just being whiners and, basically just being like feminists, and they don't really solve any problems and they just talk and all that. Because in many ways, the PUAs are kind of like normies in that regard, that they think that, well, just get some pussy and then everything will be fine, without really knowing that it's not as simple as that, although, that is what a lot of men want. Still there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure where else to go with that, really.
I guess what I would say is, I would ask you this. What do you think, since you have seen some PUA stuff, what do you think that PUA guys can, learn from MGTOWs and MRAs? Yeah.
I think they definitely get a better understanding of the legal things like legal differences between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that would then affect their, dating preferences or things like that, that would have to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
What other things would there be? I think also introducing them to the MGTOW thing, it would be, and this one I think is the most important one for men to learn especially, is that you don't have to measure your self-worth by the approval of women.
Absolutely.
Put it a step further. You don't have to, you're not validated by any external source at all.
Right.
But the main one is females. Men just seem to inherently get their social worth or social value or what they think of themselves from how women respond to them, and that is not a good yardstick to use at all.
No, it's and the thing is too, is that if you don't do that, if you actually live your life as though you don't need the validation of anyone, and you only march by the beat of your own drum, and everything you pursue is just for your own gratification, you will attract women. That's the irony of it.
That's the sweet irony of it. It's when you stop trying, that's when it happens.
Yeah, because women can smell desperation. And I think
I think it is one of those things that when you are desperate for something, there are certain tells for it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also, when it comes to, again, both the short-term and the long-term mating preferences of women, short-term, they are looking for the slightly bad boy, the slightly roguish person, which, if you don't care what they think about, that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be off doing your own thing, and some of that might be a little bit interesting, a little bit dangerous, a little bit edgy.
Mm-hmm.
But also then when it comes to their long-term mating goals, which is finding someone who is, a good, stable provider, well, you're going to be focusing probably more on your career as well, because you're not focusing on them, so you're going to do better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally, by ignoring that aspect of your life, you're growing all the other aspects of your life which help that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I got another super chat. Rico Champagne gives us $2 Canadian and says, real MGTOW won't go to ICMI. I beg to differ. We always have MGTOW there. And actually, this year we got Terrence Popp. He's going to be there. And he's the guy I'm going to try and get on that panel. So take that. Tim K gives us €4 and doesn't say anything. I don't know if is that Article 13 in action? Is that why you couldn't make a comment? I'm sorry, Tim. I don't know if you needed to say something and just couldn't. But yeah, we're going to have Terrence Popp and of Redonkulous.com, and he's going to be our MGTOW person. So there. Anyway, I guess beyond that, the reason why I think this is a good conversation to have is because I with the those three groups is because feminists have been trying to lump them all together in order to try to slander MRAs, mainly because MRAs by themselves, they're not really that harmful and there isn't much that you can say against them. But PUAs are usually the ones that they use. And even then, if you actually, like you did, if you actually look at what PUAs are saying, it's also not hateful. In fact, they're the most gynocentric of all three groups, right? Because they do kind of measure their self-worth based on women's approval, while also trying to build men up and say, well, look, you don't have to do this, but if you want to get laid, then this is what you should do. So like,
Yeah, I think the reason that feminists like to hate on the PUAs is because that they like to play the "oh, you're using her biology against her card" sort of thing by learning how to turn them on, and they don't like that. Also, what they don't like is the fact that in a lot of PUA situations, it removes female veto power from the relationship.
yes,
When a guy is like, well, when the guy does the classic pump and dump, doesn't bother calling her, that's when women get really upset by it. Because they want the option to say yes or no to the relationship that would presumably follow. When they don't get that, it's a personal insult or a personal slight or something like that, and so it must be stopped because it's a crime against humanity now.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's why also that pump and dump thing is something that I think that men need to realize. They say, and this is pretty much a truism, that women are the gatekeepers to sex. And I believe that men are the gatekeepers to commitment. And they have to recognize that they have that power. Just because a woman chooses to sleep with you doesn't mean that you have to give her a relationship if you don't actually like her, and sometimes you don't know that you don't like someone until after, you've been with them for a little while. And then they're like, you got to wait until, as Chris Rock used to say, he would say, when you start dating somebody, you're not dating them, you're dating their representative. And after a while, the representative mask starts to slip down and you see who they really are. And that's when you know if that's somebody you really want to be with. So men have to recognize that they do have control over whether or not a relationship happens, just as women realize that they control whether or not sex happens. So those are my thoughts on that anyway. I mean, that doesn't mean that men don't get a say on sex, but this is just what we call she's the gatekeeper to sex and so on.
Yeah, relationships, they should be that. It should be a two-way thing. Both parties have the say in whether or not it happens. But a lot of guys seem to lose that sense of, I don't know whether it's responsibility on their part, but they seem to sort of forget that they are in the relationship voluntarily.
Yes, they do.
Unless they're married or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's because what I've seen is that men that get into relationships, they feel so fortunate that they got close to a woman that they actually begin to convince themselves that this is where they want to be just because that woman has given them some approval. It's an addiction to the approval. It's almost like guys who don't have crushes on girls until those girls show interest in them. And then they actually become romantically interested. And I've seen that tons of times. It's actually very, very common. Yeah.
I think it is the fact that a lot of guys, well, not much as I don't like to sort of say it's the 80-20 rule, but it just happens to be that rough percentage, that it's like 80% of guys just are fighting over about 20% of the women. About 20% of the guys are getting about 80% of the women. You can verify this via internet dating sites, both proper dating and relationship sites and hookup sites. This means there's a lot of men who, whenever they get anything, are like just desperate to cling on to it at all costs. Like they don't want to sort of think, oh, well, maybe there's something else or something better out there, because, well, a lifetime of experience has taught them, no, you're a failure. Most of the time, it's not going to happen. Like, it's always been 5 years. You've had what, like two people that are into you? Oh, well, you better just hold on to whatever you got.
Yep. Men are also expected to settle, and women are told never to settle or always be on the lookout. And they have to be, because hypergamy is a thing, but it's sort of like,
that's
it's
a
on
very
steroids,
damaging thing to relationships, and it actually, I think, damages the potential for relationships as well. The reason being is, well, this is something that brain scans can tell you, and it's different brain responses to short-term relationships and long-term relationships. They stimulate different parts of the brain in different ways. So short-term relationships give you a kind of cocaine-like rush in the brain, which lights up one part of the brain. But after a few years, your relationship calms down. You no longer have that really intense, burning love and desire, but
Mm-hmm.
you've gone into that deeper connection, which stimulates a different part of your brain. It's a part of your brain that deals with familiarity, safety, and trust.
Yeah.
And the problem is these days, and I think this is more true for women than men, just glancing around women's magazines and websites and things like that, um, they're basically always told, oh, is the spark gone? It might be time to reinvigorate or move on or find something else. And so people are basically told, never reach the settled stage. It's no, you've got to jump from, this rush of a new relationship to another rush, to another rush, to another rush.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're never told that when that rush dies down, there is another part to a relationship which is just as fulfilling, just as satisfying, but it's in a different way. Instead, what they're told is when you reach that part of the relationship, that your relationship is probably dead or doomed, and you need to go and find something else. And one thing which we know about human brains is when they're stimulated in certain ways for certain amounts of time, they adapt to that stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're constantly chasing these new relationships, that cocaine-like hit, your brain is going to adapt to that. You're going to need more of them more frequently in order to satisfy that lust. And then this part of your brain that handles, satisfaction and contentness and that sense of safety, well, it's probably not going to like literally start atrophying, because obviously there's other functions of the brain that still hit these same areas, but it's not going to be as exercised. It's not going to adapt as much. And so it wouldn't surprise me if after however many years or decades, you start seeing these different areas of the brain changing their ratios in size relative to the overall mass, because, well, that's what happens. Human brains are plastic to the environment like that.
Yeah. 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 All right. So I guess we're at an hour and a half, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about incels, but I think that could be kind of that could get a little bit long because I'll just quickly mention this. I've heard people talking about the incel issue, and we've talked about incels on the channel before. But I still see this conversation coming up where people just say, well, incels, they just need to hit the gym and just get buff and go get a job and shave and put down the Nintendo Switch and everything will be great. And I just want to say that that's not really the solution for the incel problem. I think it might be for some of them, maybe, that they just need to get off their ass. But I think that in many cases, incels are men that are dealing with, they at least some of them, if not most of them, are probably legitimately genetic dead ends. Legit. If women are picking, if that 80-20 rule is to be taken as true on some level, these are the guys that are part of a percentage that they're not even gonna get a one night stand, right? They have mental disabilities, they have physical disabilities, they have issues beyond just being overweight, nerdy, socially awkward, whatever. And I think that they need what they need is that MGTOW mindset to protect them from themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think, I've read quite a lot of stuff on the incels, like the incel forums, because it's quite interesting to read through it. A lot of them are, I would say a good number of them are definitely depressed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have social anxiety, agoraphobia. I think a lot of them will have either physical or mental disabilities.
Yeah.
So yeah, something which basically tells them look, you don't need this validation in your life would help them quite a lot. Because it would encourage them to focus on other things and realize look, this part of your life is not necessary for you to be a happy, fully functioning well-rounded person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, I just got a super chat from Rico Champagne for $5 Canadian. He says, if they just need to spend $100, are they really incel? Well, that's the point that I was trying to make before. Okay, to be clear, some incels probably don't have $100 because they could just be like on disability and doesn't give you enough disposable income to do what you're suggesting, which is to buy a prostitute. But I don't think that buying a prostitute would actually solve their problem, because it's not sex that they want. They say that because they're virgins, they haven't had sex or whatever, but sex is not the problem, right?
Yeah, sex is kind of the personification of the thing that they want. What they really want is acceptance, love, and compassion. Ultimately, they want someone to actually care about them.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get that you're not going to get that with a prostitute. I mean, the prostitute will lie to you and pretend it's not going to be real. I mean, maybe for some people that'll be enough to do it, but yeah, you've also got to consider the fact that prostitution isn't legal in a lot of places as well. So
there is that, yeah. But
that's the other problem.
It wouldn't solve the problem. They want someone who sincerely has, because again, this goes back to what I've said before. Women are the gatekeepers of sex. Meaning, and this is just a reality, okay? So because women are the gatekeepers, if they select a man and say, I want you, then that's a choice that they've made, and that man knows that he's just been chosen, which is the reason why men tend to react positively. They might even become attracted to women after they learn that those women are attracted to them. And this is the same what incels want. They want the feeling that comes with a woman saying, I want to be you. I want to be with you, rather, not I want to be you. And I want to be close to you. And so that's what they're looking for. It's not the act of sex. That's sort of like the culmination of that acceptance. Rico Champagne gives us $5 Canadian, says, but acceptance, love, and compassion from a female is actually fake. Well, not to incels, it's not. So even if that's true, it's that to incels is very real. But anyway, I don't know. Tilly, do you have any final thoughts on that, and then I'll just wrap up the show?
No, I think it's just that they've been sold on, this is the thing that's going to solve your problem because they're told that it's really important, and it isn't.
Yeah.
And they kind of just need to learn that that's the case. It's just that it's a very difficult thing to shake.
It is.
Especially when you're someone who is really depressed, really socially anxious, and you're like, oh, I just want people to acknowledge that I exist and care that I exist. And they feel like no one does. It's a tough thing to break, especially since humans are inherently social animals.
Yeah. And the longer you don't have it, the more you want it. So that's the incels have it. It's sort of like, it gets worse for them the more the time goes by. It becomes a harder hole to climb out of. So, all right. Well, anyway, so with that, I'm going to wrap up the show. I want to thank you, Tilly, for coming on and just hanging out with me. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, it was all right.
All right, cool.
Pretty good.
It was a decent conversation. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming and joining us on the Fireside Chat. Give us your thoughts. I'm really curious about this sort of idea I've been bouncing around in my head about tribalism and stuff. And how we kind of like what we see with all this chaos is really just a crisis mostly focused on masculinity, but it's mainly about the relationship between men and women. There was other things I wanted to mention, like say the alt-right, for example, which are not right-wing guys, but we call them the alt-right anyway. They are a bunch of men that are struggling with their own masculinity as well in many ways. And this is just how it's sort of manifesting itself. So let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. Also, please give this video a like. And if you want to follow Teal Deer, I have his YouTube channel down there. And I also have his Minds. If you guys are on Minds, it's there as well. Be sure to follow him. Try to use the platform more. And yeah, be sure to subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks again for coming on the Fireside Chat. And I'll talk to you guys later.